What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our round 3 live stream for the Houston Open. Going to get you ready for all of your showdown lineups with a look at the weather report, any of your questions that you have for me down there in the live chat, as well as a look at some of the strategy contests out there for Saturday, as well as what you should be thinking about when putting together your builds when it comes to your lineup composition. But any of those questions that you have, don't be shy at all to go ahead and throw those down there. On top of that, go ahead and smash the like button if you guys haven't already, and say hi when you get down here to the stream. We got Goku Left, who's always there early, a sweaty tryhard if I've ever seen one. Welcome on in. We also got Alan down there as well. I appreciate the kind words and excited to get after it for tomorrow. And Retail Ripper, welcome on in as well. And it looks like he's given us some updates out there from the golf course. And hey, if you're going to give me updates from the golf course, let's get something on Matt McNeely or Harry Hall. If they can go out there and make me any birdies, hey, if I guess that's unsolicited, but I would love updates on those two. But hopefully it's treating you nicely over here on Friday. They got Ross down there as well. And look at that, the mush, right? He said Nico scorching and then immediately goes wet. Maybe the updates aren't such a good thing, but welcome on in, Ross. Hopefully you're having a great day as well. What I'll say as a little aside before we hop on in is I really wish that we had the Cognizant Classic, heck, API, or even Players Championship this week, because Florida is getting absolutely firm and fast right now. At least down here in South Florida where I am at, everything was bouncing out there on the golf course. And I was at one of the more manicured courses down here in South Florida, private club, where you'd expect it to maybe be a little bit softer than some of the other courses. And I hit a 3-iron today, so my driving iron off the tee, about a 195 carry on a drivable par 4, and got it to roll up 65, 70 yards onto the surface, which isn't something you ever have down here in Florida. Now, we'd already played 9 holes, so I kind of knew the turf conditions and knew it would be possible, but to see it actually happen and run that far is a whole lot of fun. And like I said, I wish they played this time of year, because the water would be in play even more than what you saw out here in 2024, 2025. And the winds today, they were howling about 30, 40 miles an hour when they were gusting. So that would have been pretty fun to see as well. But maybe next year they can move some of those back and see what we got. What's going on, Brian? We have Rory for a birdie out there too. He said he wish it wasn't in Texas. And yeah, I agree with that. And you're asking why I want updates on those two players. I've got some birdie bets out there on those two. So, hey, if you've got those two guys and you're able to track them, I'm all ears for it because I'm here on live stream. Let's talk through what we saw on the golf course today. Like I said, any player deep dives you want, you can throw those down in the live chat at any point. We'll be getting to that here in maybe like 5 minutes. Any strategy-based questions we'll probably focus on a little bit later on, but feel free to hit me with whatever. So course conditions today were kind of ever changing like you had for round number 1. You had a period early on today where the AM were just crushing it. In fact, like a 3.5 under par scoring average at one point. The winds kind of kicked up towards the late morning. And, you know, before that rain came in, it was a little bit more blustery than what you had for the rest of the day. So it went from that like -3.5 scoring average to closer to -2.2. Afternoon wave started pretty easy, but then the rain came through and that actually took the scoring average to a lot harder. What you have here at this -1.86. And then with that storm rolling through, there not being a whole lot of wind after that restart, course conditions got a whole lot easier. In fact, right, that's why it's closer to a -3 cut now. Earlier on today, right, -2 was the favorite in the clubhouse. But as the day went on, you saw that start to shade towards -3. So the course conditions changing was really the main culprit for some of these numbers kind of being out of whack. But -3, it still could be -2, right? We can't completely ignore that. It is only one player, right, off of being T65 there. So they're obviously expecting a lot of birdies from these sort of players. And for that to maybe move to like T68, T69 or something like that. But we've seen crazier choking before. In fact, if you take a look at the current leaderboard after the last update, it is T65 over there at -2. So you can't completely ignore that possibility when it comes to that cut line. But in terms of your like conditions versus AM, PM, I'm going back to those splits. You didn't really have to have one side versus the other. And personally, I'm pretty glad that I played both sides. I kind of ignored the weather for most of my exposure because if you take a look at these top scores out here from round number 2, you have plenty of AM guys up here towards the top, but also plenty of PM guys that are out there playing now or that just finished up a lot of their rounds. So I would say maybe more guys out there on the AM side, hence why it looks like it's about a 0.3, a 0.4 shot difference out there from wave to wave, closer to 0.3 shots out there between the two waves, 0.31. out there from AM to PM. But it wasn't like it was some drastic difference, right? You still had plenty of guys on the other side that still played well. And I think that the only guys that really got screwed were the ones that were out there in that heavy rain towards the beginning of that PM wave. If you were one of the last few guys out, like Harry Hall, those last maybe 4 or 5 groups out there from the PM wave, you have just absolutely nutted conditions. I mean, Nico wasn't even that late into the tee times, and you can see that he might even break the course record over there at -9, depending on what he does over there at 17 and 18. But just ridiculously good golf out there from both sides. You had Scotty going out there and tying the course record over there at -8. The only thing better than that, of course, would be if Nico goes out there and tops that. Out here for round number 3, tee times are really going to be something we have to keep an eye on, because you're going to have some play to go out there and finish tomorrow, which, by the way, I guess I'm going to see how many guys need to finish. So your last few groups are over there just through 10. So they're on hole 11 for all of those guys. And it looks like they're about to finish because the other guys are already on to hole 12, it looks like. That were the other groups that were the last ones off. So I would say that with maybe another 10 minutes of play left, they're probably going to blow the horn any second now. Sundown is right now over there in Houston. That they're probably going to take 2 hours, maybe an hour, 45 minutes to go out there and finish this play tomorrow. Maybe a little longer than that, just if it's, I mean, there are a lot of groups out there. So I know they only have like 7 holes to go out there and complete, but look at all these groups, right, that are yet to finish out there. And if any of them play slow, any of them have a rolling thing that comes up, that sort of thing, it could be even over 2 hours to go out there and finish, which, going over here to the weather, if they're starting around 7:30, that's pretty reasonable. Maybe even 8 over there tomorrow morning. They're finishing up around 9-10 a.m. If they're finishing up around 9-10, they're going to have to figure out the tee times, publish groups, get the course ready before they get those players out there. It could take as long as 11:30 before they can start the tee times, which, if so, completely eliminates the possibility of having twosomes. Right? They're not going to send them off of twosomes off of hole number 1. I don't even care if it's perfectly 65 guys. They go out there and make the cut. There's just not enough daylight starting at midday to get all of that golf in out there for even just 65 golfers, let alone if it's a -2 cut line. If that happens, it is not going to be pretty when it comes to getting in play out there for Saturday. But if it is closer to maybe like 67, 68 guys that are going in and making it to the weekend, they can probably finish all the golf if they're starting around midday. It'll just take those threesomes off of both sides, which will eliminate any sort of weather edge that you're looking at. The other thing to consider here is that most of the wind is here from about 9 until about noon. So that would be towards the end of when they're finishing up out there with round number 2. And then during that little hiatus, and maybe in that last like hour and a half, right out there from round number 2, you're going to have that wind kick up. But by the time they're starting out there for round number 3, maybe the first hour and a half of play out there for round 3 has some wind. But the last 3 hours out there for tomorrow looks absolutely pristine over here on this HRRR model. Now, we want to take a look at a few of the other ones as well. This one tells a little bit of a different story over here on NEM. You can see that they're calling for a little bit more consistent wind over there in the afternoon, but still nothing that's going to blow you off the golf course. Medio blue, also rather consistent the entire day. Icon model here looks pretty calm until about 7 p.m. when maybe the last few groups are finishing up their round. You have the GFS model here that looks kind of similar to NEM, and then ECM over here as well that looks pretty flat. So just like you had for rounds 1 and 2, these models are not really agreeing with each other. I will say that this HRRR is the one that I trust the most. But even if you did, right, there's no real weather edge to lean into. Like, maybe you want to avoid the first few groups out because their first 3 or 4 holes, they've got some wind to go out there and contend with. But that would be like a 0.1, maybe like a 0.15 shot difference at the very most. That would be the most extreme it could possibly get in that sort of scenario, outside of just pure old variance out there between the two waves. So I don't see weather being a massive factor out there in my round 3 lineups, partially because of the threesomes that are almost for sure going to be a thing. And then also because the weather doesn't look like it's going to change all that much. Like, even if we go over here to this NEM, and then I think it was the GFS, right? They had the stronger winds, at least sustained wise, out there towards the latter half of the day. It's still really flat, right? If they're starting around noon, the winds are within 1-2 miles an hour the entire day, right? From top to bottom down there, from 11 down to 9 miles an hour. And your wind gust have a max range of 4 miles an hour, right? Out there from 9, you have a rate around 5 p.m., and then 13, that's the highest that you have during play, out there around noon and 1 p.m. there. So even if we take a look at some of these models, right, that are calling for a little bit more wind, there's no real edge to go out there and lean into. So kind of like what I did for round 2, I'm going to play it straight up. This morning, by the way, I did check the forecast before I went out there and finalized my exposure. Even then, it didn't look conclusive. So I just didn't really go out there and play the weather in my exposure. And I didn't take down any GPPs today, right? Full transparency, of course. But I had a really good day. I had a lot of those guys like Tony Finau, a lot of your -5, -6s out there from the morning wave, like Jaegers. I went out there and played in my player pool. I just needed more of those -7, -8s that you had up there towards the top end of the board. So a pretty solid day going out there and attacking both sides of it. And when you have threesomes off of both tees, it's kind of forcing you into that same sort of scenario. So what I leaned on and what I think you guys should be leaning on out there in your process is just building a well-rounded player pool, having a reason for getting to all of your different plays. And then on top of that, playing the game theory edge. That's what I did, right? I built a player pool that I felt comfortable with, where I had a rhyme and reason for getting to every single player that I had out there in my player pool. And then out here in my lineup construction, I said, hey, it was just a 1-round sample size, right? 1 round down doesn't really mean all that much in the grand scheme of things. Let's reset the baseline out there in a lot of these different players. And I took a lot of low-owned players out there in my player pool. That's the magic sauce out there for round 2 and 3 showdown. And, when we get to round 4 out there tomorrow night, our focus does shift a little bit more onto the placement point aspect, for 2, 3 spots out there in our Sunday showdown lineups. But for rounds 2 and 3, that's all nonsense, right? We're not worried about the top end of the board whatsoever. Let's talk through some shots gained metrics here in a second. I do want to catch up on the chat before we do so. Like I said, any player deep dives, feel free to go ahead and hit me up on it. Let's see. Where did we leave off? So notification just came out for, I guess, threesomes or something like that. So go ahead and tell me what that's for, Ross, actually. I'm not sure which one you're talking about. Only 3 guys -5 or better for the PM. Echeverria -9. I don't know if that's completely true, Brian. Let me go ahead and go over here to Data Golf so that we can sort it out there by wave. Yeah, you have the super nuclear rounds right out there for Echeverria. That's going to make a massive difference. But yeah, that's not true, right? You can see up here, right? We have got all the different colors on here, and you're saying, sorry, you meant for just today. So maybe you are right about that. I guess you're right? There's 4 guys that are -5 or better. Then you've got all these other guys still on the golf course, right? So we can't completely say that this wave's over and done with, because you've got guys here that are on par 5s. You've got guys that are probably going to shoot 1, maybe even 2 better, right, than what they are right now. So yeah, technically right now, but it's kind of cherry picking, and we've got a whole lot of guys right on the tail there at -4. So we'll check back on that. We'll be on the live stream here for another 20 minutes. I do want to see what the scoring ends up looking like out there between the 2 waves, just because I think the PM wave today is going to be kind of what we see out there tomorrow. Conditions are going to be pretty much spot in line. In fact, maybe a hair harder, just because of the fact that the winds could be 2-3 miles an hour higher than what they currently are out there. But it's going to be helpful for my prop stuff, especially like if this goes closer to like a -2 scoring average. That's going to be a good key indicator out there for tomorrow. So where did we leave off? You got thought Ben Griffin got his eyes fixed. He got shit down his pants the back 9 when the putting. Maybe it was the dark get into him. You might be onto something there, Ross. But a hell of a lot of birdies out there on the front 9. So I'm glad I played him in lineups. 12 p.m. start for round 3. Okay. Is that the one that you're starting for? Or is that you just guessing the starting time? I'd say around noon. I think that makes sense for Eastern time. Local time. So I guess 1 p.m. Eastern time would be when they're most likely going to start. We got a whole bunch of updates down there in chat. I've got to say, retail, I don't know if we need that many out there. Griffin says, couldn't see shit with the shades on, Ross. Dude, if he was wearing the shades out there in the dark, that's interesting strategy. And you're saying play stopping? Yeah, it's going to stop right about now. They're allowed to finish their hole, by the way. So you might have a few guys that have a few holes still finishing there. And go collect with the legendary statement there. But let's go through these shots gained metrics. So my process has a few different ways for identifying my player pool. If you're part of my Patreon page, you guys know what I'm already looking for at players. I've got ball striking poppers that I'm going out there and taking in my player pool. That'll be for round 2 ball striking stats. I'll be trying to find guys that hit the ball well today that can hopefully continue that out there into moving day. I look for course history players. That's something that I don't play the same course history guys for every single round, but if I can get a good ownership number on somebody that has good course history, right, I'll take a little bit of a bounce back on that sort of player, especially if they've shown it at this golf course before. I look for short game regression players. So that means guys that were struggling around the green with the putter, that were decent or even good over there in the other two ball striking categories. If they were, I would say that they're due for some regression back to the mean. So that's another category of players that I look for. And the last one are high upside players. And high upside means high birdie or better percentage players, players that average a high DraftKings score over there from the Showdown format, players that also are good in par 5 scoring. That's something that I look for out there in Showdown. So reason for that, of course, right? High upside players equate to players that give you a lot of birdies or better per round, which is how you go out there and you score in DraftKings scoring out there from the Showdown format. So, I don't think it's rocket science to want to look for players that have that aggressiveness, that have that firepower to go out there and make 7 or 8 birdies out there in a round, because that's what you need to go out there and make yourself an optimal play, right? Out there on this sort of slate. So I try and look for those sort of players, course history, ball striking, short game regression, as I mentioned before. And the ball strikers and the short game regression candidates, well, those are the kind of things that you can find with these round 2 stats. So let's start with the ball striking candidates. So over here in this ball striking category, it doesn't mean that I'm playing just every guy towards the top here, right? That would be absolute nonsense. For example, Nico Echeverria up there at T2 right now, he's probably going to be donkey chalk tomorrow. As DGen75 would say, when somebody is 2-3 times the ownership of everyone else around them, they're not worthy of getting all that sort of ownership. So, Echeverria would be like obviously that sort of player, but guys like a Pendrith, Kitayama, even a Gary Woodland up there at T8, because of their standing on the leaderboard right now, are going to get a lot more attention than their peers. So it's not like you have to fade every single player that's up there starting in the top 10, but of those players up there, there's realistically probably only 1 or 2 of them that should be worthy of playing, because the rest are prime fade candidates, right? Going out there and playing against the rest of the field. And just like I mentioned over there for your round 1 showdown lineups, you don't want to overreact to an 18-hole sample size. So wow, it's great to try and find some ball striking poppers. It is great to try and find some short game regression candidates. It's not by any means a foolproof method, right? To go out there and find plays that are going to go out there and crush. But what it does is it does give you a better chance of those guys going out there and improving. However, you want to make sure that they're not super high-owned players. Right? I talked about building a player pool that is sound, right? You need a process for that. Right? I shared my process for going out there and building a player pool. Obviously, it doesn't have to be the same as what you're doing, right? But you should have a process for going out there and finding players. The other aspect to consider, though, is the game theory side, right? When we go through and we're actually building a lineup here together over here in like maybe 5-10 minutes, you're going to hear us talk about, trying to get leverage against the rest of the field, trying to make sure that we're not going to duplicate ourselves out there in GPPs, give ourselves a chance to actually move up the leaderboards when our guys go out there and have good days. That's why the players that are maybe a little bit sneakier, like a Ben Griffin, for example, could be a really good candidate to go out there and play. And you can see, right, Ben Griffin here losing 2 strokes over there with the putter and gaining those 3 strokes over there on approach play. I mean, he's the poster child out here for a round 3 showdown play. Not only is the ball striking on par, off the tee play was just slightly into the positive. So I would say he could be a little bit better in that category out here for round number 3. But the putter, him losing strokes out there round 2, also round 1, by the way, if you go over here to Ben Griffin, you'll see that he lost strokes in that category as well. In fact, he lost over a stroke over there in round number 1, and yet he still gained over there with the iron play. So it's been a 2-round sample size at this point of Ben Griffin being really close to having a nuclear round. And it's not even like he has to go out there and gain 3-4 strokes to the field. Like if you take a look at the top end of the putting list, a lot of guys did that, right? You had 3 guys that gained over 3 strokes putting today, a whole bunch that were gaining over 2.5 strokes out there on the greens today. It's not like you need that for him to go out there and have a nuclear round. Even 1 stroke gain to the field, with him gaining 3 strokes out there tee to green, could be something like a -7 round out there for moving day. So that's why I look for some of those ball striking poppers. Not every single one, by the way, if we go back to the ball striking category, is going to be somebody that's due for putting regression. So that's why I said Ben Griffin was kind of like the poster child out there for my exposure, because he checks both boxes, right? He looks, perfect out there from the shots gained perspective. Not everyone in your player pool is going to look this way, though, right? I just want to, bring in some realism, at least some realistic expectations when it comes to actually building your player pool. But a lot of the top end guys here that aren't starting in the top 10, so like a John Pack, I have to say these lower tier 6K guys, right? I'm not usually a sucker for playing them all that often, so I probably won't play a John Pack. But if you guys are a sucker for playing those super cheap guys, like maybe you really want to play a Scotty at like 13K again, to make it work, guys like John Pack are essential out there in your player pool. So, I'd much rather be taking a shot on somebody at $6,200 that has this kind of stat profile where he gains 4 strokes on approach and then loses over there with the putter than just some random guy down low. So if you're going to go that direction, I'm not against it with that sort of play. So you got Steven Yeager there, it looks like at T14. I don't know if he'll be mega chalk, but after a -6 rounds, especially bogey-free -6, I do think that some people are going to go out there and play him in lineups, at least more than what you had out there for Showdown today. So he is really good out there in every stat category, actually, and gained across all 4 out there in round 2. But I think he'll be a little bit more popular than really what we're looking for. Even a Kurt Kitayama over here will probably be a little bit chalkier than what we'd be hoping for as well. But like these Valamakis, these David Skins, there's 6K range players like Pac that I'm not usually thrilled about going out there and throwing into lineups. If you're looking for a diamond in the rough to save that salary, these are the kind of players that I'd be trying to land on. So we're looking for higher exposure plays. It's a lot of scrubs actually that did it with the ball striking, which I don't know. Usually it's the stars. Usually it's your best players that are up there. So it's a little surprising, I'd suppose, that you don't see more guys like a Rory, Scotty Scheffler up here towards the top end of the list. You can see Scotty there. He had a decent day ball striking, about 2 strokes gained out there between the 2 categories, just a little bit below that. But like a Michael Kim here at T18, this is the kind of guy who hit the ball solidly today, but that isn't going to carry all that ownership. I know Scotty at first place. Everyone knows, by the way, he's probably going to be like 40% owned over there in Showdown tomorrow. He's somebody that you could still probably play at 40% if you differentiate in other spots of your lineup. But a Michael Kim, for example, who's up there in the top end of the 8K range, he could be a piece of leverage that you're going out there and throwing into lineup. So, you could still start with Scotty and then maybe have a Michael Kim as your second, third man in out there into that sort of lineup. Probably a second man in because of how expensive he is over there in the Showdown format. But a Michael Kim over here, he's probably going to be 10, maybe 12% owned, I'd say, over there at GPPs. I haven't quite ran my projections quite yet. I'll be doing that for my Patreon members after I do this live stream over here for you guys. But this Michael Kim play, especially if he's going to be in that low teens ownership, which I think is possible out there for him, with these kind of ball striking stats, he is the kind of player that I'd be jumping on. So it's not so much those mega chalky guys towards the top, but like a Davis Thompson, for example, he gained nearly 2 strokes ball striking. That's despite losing about a stroke off the tee there. He did gain over there with the putter. So as I was mentioning with Ben Griffin, not everyone's going to have that perfect kind of stat profile, but at T30, he doesn't have to be a perfect play, right? He's going to be a little bit lower owned than some of the other guys around him. And because he's a little bit overpriced compared to some of the other guys around him, like, a lot more people are just going to spend up for a Rory or Scotty. Like that is going to be by far the most common lineup construction, like it has been all week, whether it was for main slate, round 1 and 2 Showdown. It's been the same, right? Most lineups are starting with a Rory or a Scotty and then moving on. If you have a Davis Thompson as your first or second man in, like it could maybe be like another guy in the 9K range that you're using as your first man in, and then maybe Davis Thompson as your second man in, he's going to be super low owned in those sort of builds. And because he's maybe a little bit more expensive than he should be, I think there's a good chance that in those lineups that start with the, Rory or Scotty, which will be most of them out there, that he's not going to get played much because of his price tag. And just to double check that, he's $9,200 over there for round 3 Showdown. I see him getting some ownership, but when you have guys like Wyndham Clark, $100 cheaper, Steven Yeager, that's $200 cheaper coming in the -6 round, obviously last year's champion, $100 more expensive. You got a Sungjae Im there at $9,300. I could see him being sub 10% owned for sure over there in some lineups. So these are the kind of guys that I'm more so looking to with the ball striking stats. You're looking at Isaiah Salinda. He's really been hitting his driver well, which is no surprise if you know his game. He's one of the flushers off the tee that we have. We also have the Sam Stevens here at T30, maybe a little bit of a sneakier option. He had the -5 round, so maybe it's not that sneaky to go out there and play a Sam Stevens, but still grading out well with the ball striking. Wyndham Clark, and we're going to talk about this when it comes to the putting regression here in a second, but look at this, right? Gaining 1.5 strokes there ball striking, but losing strokes putting, which is kind of unheard of out there for Wyndham Clark. So we'll have to see how it all bears out on these sort of players with their ownership. But I would argue that there's a good chance that because he's T45, some of these other guys at T30, like a Davis Thompson, a Sam Stevens, that you see up here above, they're not going to be some of the more popular players that we have on the slate. Those are reserved for the guys starting in the top 15, top 20, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier. Another stat category that I really like to focus on would be the putting over here. Obviously, these guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes in that category could be due to be a little bit more sharp the next time around. So you could look to for a few of these different players out there for some putting regression. Already mentioned Ben Griffin before as somebody that I wouldn't expect to go out there and lose 2-3 strokes putting every single round. You've got guys like a Bo Hostler over here who, look, well, he's going to miss the cut, so don't worry about him. But Hayden Springer, that's probably not going to lose 2 strokes putting. Let's see who else is actually going to make the cut. A lot of the guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes putting are going to be missing the cut, which makes sense if you think about it. If you're not getting that many putts to drop, it's usually pretty hard to go out there and make it to the weekend. That's why when you have somebody here like a Wyndham Clark who lost 2 strokes yet still was able to go out there and shoot a -2 today, that you would say that they're due to go out there and get a few more to drop. So that's why he's towards the top end of my short list. They got guys like Sanjay that didn't have the best day on the greens either. Max McGreevy, he still has a lot of golf left, but if he can make the cut there, he's sitting at -2 right now. He looks like, and it's only been 11 holes, right? So his shots gained profile is going to change here as he finishes up play tomorrow morning. But if he makes the cut, he could probably be a play out there for some short game regression. So with the play not completed, it does give us a few curveballs when it comes to this. But obviously, you want to do some research out there tonight. You don't just want to be reacting over there tomorrow morning. Usually in these kind of situations, my go-to is to have a player poll set ahead of time, even to have some lineups set ahead of time out here tonight. And then tomorrow morning to be managing my portfolio, especially for guys that are going inside and outside of the cut line. Every single time you have this scenario, they're going to be guys that you thought were safe out there into the weekend that tomorrow morning go out there and choke it away. And you don't want to get caught with your pants down tomorrow, right? And have those guys in lineup. So while you might want to have some lineups built, have a player pool, for sure, you want to have your player pool set at some point out there tonight. Don't be married to it, right? Tomorrow morning, when you have some of those guys moving in and out, the guys that are out, obviously get them out of your lineups. But some of the guys that move into the cut line that weren't expected to be there before, and this is much easier normally when I have my projections done and I can start to give you some of the numbers on some of the guys that are outside the cut line. But normally when you have somebody that moves into it late, they're like at most 1-2% owned. And that's for a player that is like a more well-known prospect. Now, if it's like a Rory or a Scotty and they move from outside to inside the cut line the morning of, they might be like 5 to maybe 7% owned out there in GPPs, but that would be at the very most. In most cases, when you have guys moving within that cut line, they're 1%, maybe even sub 1% owned out there in GPPs. So if you know these guys are going to get no ownership out there in round number 3, and they played well enough to go out there and move themselves into the cut line, I like that momentum, right? They've already woken up, showing us that they're feeling good that day, can go out there and make a few birdies, and no one's going to use them out there in lineup. So it's important to do the research now. It's important to have an idea of the kind of guys that you want to be playing. But I also do want to mention that aspect of it because it's a weird slate, right? When you have the play still left to go out there and finish. Around the green, though, you can take a look at some of those guys to regress back to the mean as well. So that's where you have players like a David Skins that could be due for some regression, but he did gain a whole bunch of strokes putting too. So those perhaps kind of offset each other if you're taking a look at that. Charles Ryder, he lost over a stroke there around the green as well. Guys like Costello, Palmer probably aren't going to do it again, mostly because they're missing the weekend anyways and won't be teeing it up. But their stat profile, you wouldn't expect them to putt and hit it that terribly around the green very often. The same things that we were saying about the putting over there over the last few minutes, you'd say about this around the green category. So you combine the around the green and putting. That's where I find my short game regression candidate players. And just like this off the tee and approach play, it's not like they have to go out there and be gaining in both categories, but it's the most helpful if they are, right? If they've been hitting their driver ball and they're going out there and setting up a lot of birdie looks. But if they're strong in one category or the other, and then the other one might be around neutral, that sort of thing, like Echeverria, like he's going to be chalky. I'm probably not playing him, but let's take the ownership out of it. Let's take the name out of it with this kind of stat profile. A guy that's just average off the tee, but gaining a whole bunch of strokes on approach, I still like, right, out there from the ball striking perspective, just like over here with the putting, like if they're due for a bunch of strokes regression over there with their putter, yet they still gained like a half a stroke to a stroke over there around the green, that doesn't mean I completely cross off that sort of player. So I'd just like to point that out, that not every single player that you're using in your player pool is going to be a perfect play. But when you find your Ben Griffins of the world that might be a little bit overlooked there for round 3 showdown, you take advantage of them. You try and do it as much as you can. Ryan Palmer has not been playing very good golf, man. Kind of a tough thing to see out there from some players, but it's been a thing for the last maybe 5-6 starts. So hopefully he's able to go out there and get it figured out at some point. Let's see, Rory was never missing the cut. Okay, so I guess you were calling that before, Brian. Tip of the cap to you if you did that. Can we deep dive Stephen Fisk? Seems like he was striping it, but couldn't buy a putt. Granted, he's -2. It might not make the cut, but this makes him a great low-owned play. You hit the nail on the head there, right? Some of those sort of players you still want to be doing a deep dive on. So yeah, let's bring up Stephen Fisk. So if what you're saying is true, he'd be gaining in the 2 ball striking categories, which is true. About a stroke gained out there off the tee on approach. You can see in those short game categories, he's losing just under a stroke between those two. So yeah, hasn't finished quite yet. So we'll have to see if the cut line ends up moving back to -2 and he ends up making it. I thought he might have a few holes left, that sort of thing, to try and get to -3. Yeah, if he ends up making it because the cut line moves back, he could totally be an option out there in some lineups. But I will say that I don't think it's that likely that we get that -2 cut. In fact, Data Golf has it at a 0.1% chance, but it isn't 0.0. So he's like I said, you can do your due diligence on all those sort of players. I don't know if I spent a bunch of time on those -2s that already finished, but it is good to know, especially on that sort of player. Michael Kim and Thigala live in Houston. I did know that. He said, good guess as to the 6 of 6 rate. So don't even have to guess, Wayne. We can actually just go over to Cut Sweats and check the exact percentages. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now, which if you guys don't already follow him over there on X/Twitter, I would highly recommend it. It's run by Nelson Adcock over there at the Cut Sweats. And he's always tweeting out the current 6 of 6 rate out there in a lot of the different contests. And I have it up right now. It looks to be about 5%, give or take maybe 1% out there and given in different contests. It looks like in cash, the big $5 double up, it's closer to about a 9% 6 of 6 rate. But in all the big GPPs, so like $5, the big $25 GPP that you have for main slate, it's all about 4, maybe even 5% 6 of 6 rate. So not a whole bunch out there, but not a super low rate either. Do I think they push back lock for round 3? They should, Brian. At least historically they have. And they've done it actually like as the tour's gone out there and announced when they're starting play. So they'll probably move it first to 7 a.m. tomorrow. Then they'll probably move it to 9 a.m. when they're still finishing up round number 2. If they announce at some point that the round is going to start at, let's say, like 11:30 a.m., maybe it's noon, like we were postulating before, then they'll move it to that position. So yeah, historically they do, but it's not a guarantee, right? There's the off chance that they don't move the lock. Did guys who lost strokes putting on round 1 end up gaining strokes today for a bounce back? I'll check myself if it's too much to look for. No, I'll look at it, Ryan. So we'll look at it in a few different players. You know, we're not going to do it with every single guy out there. In general, it's not going to happen in every single case, right? Especially like these guys that lost like 2-3 strokes putting. They were down there towards the bottom end of the leaderboard. But like Kevin Yu is going to be the perfect case example for why it works. But we'll check on a few other ones here as well. So Kevin Yu here, because I already know what happened with Kevin Yu. So that's why I really want to look at this one. He lost like 3 strokes putting. And you can see that he shot -7 today. So you can probably guess what happened, right? Out there with Kevin Yu. He went out there and he gained 5 strokes putting. So can it go from like -3 to +5? Yes, right? There are going to be examples of that every single round. They're out there on the PGA Tour. But Carl Phillips, for example, you can see he lost 4 strokes out there today. Let's see what he did in round 1. Was he a gainer that went out there and then lost afterwards? He might have just lost both days, right? Let's see. Yeah, he gained 2 strokes out there in round 1 and then lost 4 strokes out there today. So you can see a ton of variance right out there in that putting category. But let's do it the way that you said before, right? Look at the losers and then out there today. Let's look at Thurston Lawrence. Thurston Lawrence, by the way, lost about 3 strokes over there putting in round 1. By the way, I love Thurston Lawrence. He's normally a much better putter than that. Then today, he gained 2 strokes putting. Wow. So yeah, that's another example of that happening. And it's not going to happen in every case. I promise you it's not going to happen in every single case. But let's look at a few others. So Will Chandler up there, he lost 4 strokes putting over there in round number 1. And then in round 2, he gained stroke putting. Okay, so this is proving my point out there with what we look at with the stats. But I figured at some point, right, we'd find somebody that maybe lost both days. Let's look at David Skins, right? He lost both days, right? Lost 3 strokes round number 1, okay, and then then he gained 3 strokes on it. I gotta say, this just proves my point beautifully, doesn't it? Paul Waring, surely, right? He shot +2 in round 2. Surely he lost strokes putting both days, right? He lost about 3 strokes out there in round number 1. And yeah, he lost 0.5 today. So yeah, you're going to have guys that lose both days. And that's why you finish in 150th, right? You're like third from last place. Or have the guys that went out there from withdrew. That's what will lead to a 150th place finish out there at a PGA Tour event. But yeah, not a lot of guys are going to have that happen. So great question. I'm always willing to go through the stats on that sort of stuff. Sure, it takes some time, but it hammers home a point in a lot of different cases. He said Skins goes off now and then, but lottery as to when. Agree with that, and I don't think this is the best course for him. It's a little bit too long, in my opinion. You've only got 1 bullet for your 6 of 6 getting through from 6 lineups. A chip and a chair. Hey, you're over the field for your 6 of 6 rate. So I think you can feel pretty good about that, Brian, because most people that only have 6 lineups would have 0 getting 6 of 6 through if it's only about a 5% clip. So good stuff there. Yeah, you went off big time for sure. Yeah, it happens with a lot of players actually, right? Them going out there and flipping that putter. And yeah, that's why we go after and look for those players, Brian. And it's not even just that category. I will say that I am going to do a rain check on the around the green stuff. I don't want to go through every category, right, and show you that regression. But if you look at these around the green players, and then you take, and obviously KH Lee withdrew, so he's not a great example, but these other guys that went out there and lost a bunch of strokes around the green, you'll probably see that that didn't happen out there in round 2 for all of them. In fact, most of them probably played a lot better out there with their around the green play. So that's the idea, right? Same idea right out there with the round 2 stats that you can hopefully find out there from round number 3. In terms of the contests that we have available, they're a little bit better than what we had yesterday. And I think the key indicator of that is this was an 80K contest and now it's 100K. You had this contest, which I believe it was 100K, $20 GPP. Now it's 125K out there total. The contests are just a little bit bigger than what you had the day before. And, you know, this $100 single entry is 15% to first. That has just become the standard out there in that sort of contest. It's one of the more sustainable GPPs that you can enter. This is the big $5. It is a 7th over there to first place. It is one of the better and flatter payout structures that you have in this sort of GPP. So I kind of like these contests. They're not massive, right? They're not like the majors, the signature events, where we're going to get much larger prize pools, especially out there for first place. But they did a decent job with setting up the payout structure in them, so I can't complain that much. So you've got your $5 single entries, you've got your $12 single entries down there as well. You've got your $33 single entries, which are always contests that I'm looking to go out there and enter. And I was looking for the $10 18 max, and it doesn't look like they have that one over there at DraftKings. But I'll probably see myself in that $100 single entry. For sure, I'll have a lineup out there. And then probably some lineups out there in that $5 GPP. So we'll see. It'll probably be in that 40 to 50 range like I typically do over there for Showdown. But your contest selection, better than what we had out there for round 2. But pretty much just the standard that we've had for most events over the last month or so. Outside the players, which, as you would probably think, were a little bit bigger. So over here with our lineup construction now. So went through a few of the different contests that were available. Now let's talk through what you should be thinking about when you're actually putting together a build, which mostly for rounds 2 and 3, it's a lot of the same. So if you're here for the live stream yesterday, it's going to be a lot of the same kind of talking points that we had, but it's getting different to the field, making sure that you have enough leverage to actually move up in those contests when you guys hit for you, and make sure you don't duplicate out there with other people. And really the only super mega chalky players that I think we're going to have out here towards the top end of the board are going to be a Scotty and a Rory. They're going to get quite a bit of ownership. I do think a Minwoo Lee will be the next highest owned player up here towards the top end of the board. And then maybe guys like a Jaeger, a Pendrith, could be in that like 15 to 20% range out there in GPPs. But the rest of the guys that made the cut here towards the top end of the board, you're looking at 10 to 15% ownership out there at most. In some cases, like especially with the guys that might just make the cut, like Sungjae Im, Wyndham Clark, let's see who else, like Mav McNeely right down here at T43. These sort of players, you could be looking at closer to that like 10 to 12% mark, right? Rather than closer to that like 12 to 15% mark with some of those other players that you have out there. So we always want to be thinking about that ownership towards the top end of the board. But let's say that you still like a Scotty. I mean, how couldn't you? He's winning the event. He showed us the form. He's got the course history around this sort of track. Let's say that you're a sucker that for that sort of price tag at $12,900. You can still eat that sort of chalk as long as you mitigate it with the rest of your lineup here. So just as a thought exercise, we're going to throw him into the lineup here just so I can show you how you can navigate getting around that sort of ownership number. For our next man in, I already mentioned before that maybe Michael Kim is a good second man in. It's not like he's going to be completely overlooked at T18, especially with his form over the last month and a half, 2 months over there in the PGA Tour. But at $8,800, he's cheap enough where it's not completely crippling you with your salary, with your second man in. And at the same time, it's giving you a player that was really good out there from tee to green. If you remember, he was positive out there on approach, off the tee, and over there around the green. So a player that really fits the kind of stat profile that we're looking for and could have put it better over there over the first few days. So $8,800, we're going to go ahead and throw him in there as our second player in. Third man in, you could probably sneak in like a lower 8K guy if you really wanted to stretch the salary. I would personally be a little bit more comfy going down here into that 7K range. So McGreevy, if he makes the cut, I think he's a fantastic play. But as I mentioned before, I believe he's at -2 and needs to make a birdie out there tomorrow morning to go out there and make the cut. Novak, I also believe, is down there at -2. So he's going to need the cut to move back to go out there and make the weekend as well. But like a Ricky Fowler here, I know we didn't do that much of a deep dive on him before, but at T43, he's not going to get all that sort of ownership. And he could be the guy that goes out there and gets you a little bit different to the field. And though we didn't do a massive deep dive on him before, round 2, you can see he gained about 2 strokes over their ball striking and then lost a little bit under 2-stroke short game. So maybe not like the perfect candidate to go out there and play, but I'm glad that we went back and checked on these shots gained metrics because he's the exact kind of player that I'd be looking for some leverage. Fits the kind of stat profile that I'm looking for in players in my lineups, and also isn't going to be overly owned in that portion of the board. Our next man in, I'd probably go a little bit further down here to try and dumpster dive a little bit more. I believe Joel Damon's through the cut. I also think that Thor Bjornsson is as well. So let's double check on those. I think Thor might still be playing. So yeah, Thor is still at -3 and on the golf course. But let's see if Joel actually finished his round. And yeah, Joel did. He finished earlier over there in the AM wave. Not the best stat fit, but ownership-wise, starting there at T45, he's not going to be one of the more popular players that you have here in the bottom end of the 7s. So for the sake of this lineup, just because I want to get through this section here in the next few minutes, Joel Damon, you could throw into this lineup for some lower ownership numbers. Ideally, though, maybe there's somebody in this lower end of the 7K range that's a little bit of a better play. And let me see if I can sort this by salary, if we can find one. The unfortunate part is that this is the main slate pricing, so it's not really going to be the same as what we have out here for Showdown. But let's see what we have. So a Gary Woodlands, but he's going to be a little bit too chalky for me. Like maybe a Carl Phillips. Well, he's outside the cut line right now, right? So he'd have to birdie a few holes to go out there and make it to the weekend. But a Matt McCarty, like he could make sense out there in this sort of build. But let's see what he costs. Is he, $7,000 as opposed to $7,100? Maybe you'll take a Matt McCarty instead of a Joel Damon. But from the ownership perspective, it's accomplishing a lot of the same as what we're looking for. For your last 2 players, that leaves you with about $6,900 remaining out there for your last few spots. Let's go down here and throw in somebody towards the top end of the 6K range, maybe bottom end of the 7K range once again. So we could go to Joel Damon, right? We could use him as the plug and play option right there. But just to kind of think back on some of the shots gained metrics we were looking at, Sam Stevens, right? He was one of those players that was gaining over there from tee to green. You throw him in there at $7,200. That puts you at $6,600 out there for your last spot in. pretty much no matter who you play down here at this bottom spot over here, you're going to be fine over there in your lineup. Now, a few check marks, a few checklists you should probably go through, right, when building your lineups before submitting is, first off, make sure everyone in your lineup has made the cut. That's especially important when you have this sort of slate, and guys that miss the cut are going to still be in the player pool. And then on top of that, make sure you have enough leverage over there in your lineup. Your player pool, usually I set my player pool ahead of time right before I go out there and start building lineups, which is why I'm not sure if I'm going to be on all these different players here. I know for sure I'm going to be playing Michael Kim and Ricky Fowler. I'm also for sure going to be playing guys like Sam Stevens in my lineups. No, not sure yet out there on Scheffler. I'm going to have to see the ownership that I project him for over there on my Patreon stuff. McCarty probably makes my player pool, I would say, but we'd have to see. So, obviously use your player pool to go out there and build lineups, but really just make sure all your guys made the cut after you go out there and put together a build, and then make sure you have enough leverage. And what I mean by that is you should have a product ownership number in mind, especially if you're building over there in an optimizer. Set a product ownership number that you feel comfortable with, which you usually figure out that number via experience, right? Going out there and playing in GPPs. But a good rule of thumb to go out there and live by is that your product ownership should be less than 1 over the total amount of entries that you have in that sort of contest. So, find the percentage that it would be, 1 over the amount of entries. So in this sort of contest, this is the big 555 would be 1 over 200. This sort of rule doesn't work that well for smaller field single entries. Single entries, right, you don't worry about the ownership nearly as much. And when you do this sort of thing, it's going to give you a really big product ownership number. So you're pretty much going to be able to go out there and enter whatever the hell you want, right, in a 200 entry contest. But when it's like a 5,000 entry contest, or when it's like a 10,000 to a 15,000 entry contest, using that 1 over total amount of entries as your product ownership number is amazing. And the reason for that, especially if you're in like a 15,000 entry contest, is it makes sure that you have less than a 1 theoretical dupe on every single lineup that you're going out there and entering. And what I mean by that is if you take the product ownership of a lineup and then you multiply it by the amount of entries in the contest that you're playing in, this isn't an exact science. It's just an approximation for this sort of number, but it gives you an idea of how many lineups are going to have that exact combination. Now, because players go out there and almost always spend all of their salary, it's a little bit different in actuality. In fact, the actual amount of dupes is usually a little bit higher than that number that you get in theory. But if you go out there and you make sure that at most you have 1 theoretical dupe out there in your lineups, it's a good place to start. And like I said, via experience, you can kind of adjust that out there to your liking out there in either direction. But that's what I work with out there for a lot of my different contests. And that's a nugget, by the way, that I usually don't give people out there in my process. In fact, I didn't mean to say that out there over here on this live stream. It's not something that I usually share out there with other people, but I figured, right, I might as well go over it if we're talking this part of the process over there. And it doesn't have to be an exact science, right? That's what I do. I adjust that based on different slates. Like, for example, if I'm playing in like a smaller field GPP, but it might not be like 100 or 200 entries. It might be closer to maybe like 1,000 entries that I'm entering. It might not be exactly 1 over the total amount of entries that I'm using as my product ownership percentage. It might be like double that, right, that I'm using out there as my percentage. So I try and adjust it a little bit, but like in the big main slate GPPs where you have like over 10,000 entries, that is the rule of thumb that I use. So whether I meant to share it or not, I guess I gave you guys the goods there. Jake Knapp lost a lot round 1 around the green. And then what did he do today, Brian? Just out of curiosity, I honestly have no idea. I didn't get to see a lot of Jake Knapp's round. I was out on the golf course, as I was mentioning before. And then round 2, he gained around the green. That's nuts, dude. It's crazy how that works, huh? Out there with the regression stuff. I see you're becoming a little bit of a believer, huh? Out there in the process. I love to see it, man. He said, it will depend on a number of things, but generally when building my lineups, do I have a general range as for player pool size? So I'll give you a few rules of thumb because you're spot on. It does really depend on what you're doing. If I'm entering a 150 max, it's normally in the 30 to 40 player range. Now, there might be a few slates where it's slightly tighter than that. That's kind of rare. I usually am at least in like the 30 range out there in my 150 max pool. There are some times, though, where it goes slightly over 40 that I'm playing in 150 max pool. If I'm only entering like 50 lineups, though, 40, 50 lineups like I do for Showdown, I condense that down. So rather than playing 30, 40 players like I do for main slate, for Showdowns in rounds 2 through 4, it's closer to 20 to 30 players that I'm using in my player pool. So depending on how many lineups you're entering, you're going to constrict down that player pool size. And I know people like my boy LSU Nick that play 300 lineups out there for a lot of slates. If you're entering 300 lineups, maybe you have like 50 guys out there in your player pool. Now, for Showdown, that could be pretty tough because there's only so many guys that are actually making the cut. But I more so mean that for main slate when I'm talking about those things. So hopefully it gives you an idea. If you're entering 20 lineups, right, you just take it, a little bit further down. You're probably looking at like 20 guys that you're using in a lineup, like plus or minus like 3 or 4 out there in either direction. That's what I would say about that. Damon, good course history. Let me double check that, because if he is, maybe I'll use him in my player pool, man. I don't know. Brian, you're giving me the goods here right now. I got to say, I love it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, top 10, T9 over there a couple of years ago, top 5 before that. Did he make the cut? Let's double check on that, right? That's the other part. He did, right? And he had the pretty good shots gain metrics too with the ball striking. Yeah, Joel Damon making the player pool for sure. And yeah, for 150, it's in that 30 to 40 range for me. And some people play tighter than that, right? They go out there and they really get over the field on players. But even in my set of 30, 40 lineups, I'm well over the field and I'm well over 2x leverage on a lot of players. So I'm a pretty tight player at that 30 to 40 mark, which means you could probably even go bigger than that in a set of 150 just because I'm already aggressive to begin with. So if you don't want to be as aggressive, the way to do that would be to make a slightly larger player pool and to take slightly less leverage out there in each player. Thoughts on Celinda for tomorrow? So I like the shots gained metrics. We were looking at some of the ball striking stuff before out there for Isaiah, and he really fits this golf course well. He's a bomber, which is not the only thing I'm looking for this week, but it is one of the main things I'm first looking for in terms of course fit. And round number 1, it was a lot of the same. He actually hit the ball even better out there on Thursday. Just needs to find a way to have a spike putting round. And, the form's decent too. He's had a pretty solid start to 2025. I'm not going to read your comment there, Brian, because you used a word that's maybe slightly frowned upon, but I hear you. You said product ownership's a little bit over your head, we'll say. If you want to ask questions on that, Brian, by the way, I am willing to kind of like dumb it down for you, kind of give you all the basics on what that means on the Discord. Just hit me up, whether it's on the SHIPIT one. I know you're on my Patreon page too. I can just probably hit you on the DMs there, out there with some of that information, but don't feel like it's too much over your head. It's all right. Dude, everyone at the top in the lotto has a 5-6. This is nuts. Sorry, you're just getting there. What's the 5-6? Or you mean a 5 out of 6? This is gonna get nuts. I didn't see that, Colin. So I don't usually look at the top end of the GBPs. Like, I get comments all the time, by the way, of people on my comment going, I see at the top of the $5. Oh, I see at the top of the $100 single entry, that sort of thing. I appreciate you guys rooting for me. I really do. And I don't want you guys to stop leaving those comments when you see that. But it does crack me up because I know in the back of my head, I'm like, first off, I didn't even check myself. I didn't even know if I'm up there towards the top. And then it means nothing, right? Because even if you only have 18 holes left, I know never to count your chickens before they hatch. I'd much rather, in fact, be in 50th place heading into round 4 than be in first place in the large field GPP, which I know sounds crazy, but it's true. I want runners on Sundays. I want guys that are going out there and actually shooting a really good score. You need the guy who's going to win it. So if there's a guy up by 5 strokes, I need him in that sort of lineup. But like the other guys in that lineup, I want guys that are slightly further back. So it is a good place to be, Colin. I've got to say, I'm slightly losing money so far this week in my main slate exposure. I haven't checked for like an hour or so. So the last few minutes of play there could have changed it up a little bit. But I'm in an okay spot. As long as I've got some 6 of 6s, we're live for the weekend. That's for sure. He said, thank you for last stream. You're doing good in the top of the dollar divot contest. Good stuff out there for round 2. I'm not 100% sure on that contest. I'm sure if I saw it on the leaderboard, I'd be able to find it. But good stuff. That's always a good place to be. And thank you for deleting the comment. Yeah, you could probably see why I didn't want to bring it up. It's nothing that offensive or anything, but I do want to keep it a little bit more PG rated over here on the live stream. But that's all I've got over here for the live stream, guys. Everything I wanted to go through in terms of, the strategy, what I'm looking for out there and the players and whatnot. Best of luck with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. Only thing I need you guys to do, if you haven't already, smash that like button over here for the SHIPIT Nation crew and subscribe so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That'll, of course, include the round 4 live stream out there tomorrow night, as well as DGen 75's emergency stream, which will be out out there on Wednesday on this channel. Always got to check that out there for a sleeper play of the week. Funny bits, of course, out there with DGen and able to support him through everything he's going through right now. So make sure to check that out over there on Wednesday. And for the prop and betting stuff over here for round number 3, that is going to be on my YouTube channel. Time to be decided. At this point, I'm not 100% sure if we're going to be doing it tonight. I'm not even sure if we're going to have prop boards to go out there and bet on Prize Picks and Underdog tonight. So I guess that's the main issue. Historically, they do post boards, but they could take all night, right, to go out there and post those sort of boards. So we will be doing a preview at some point over there on the prop and betting side of things. Just not 100% sure exactly when that's going to be starting. So keep an eye on my Twitter/X for all of the information out there from the prop and betting side. But yeah, that'll be for Underdog, Prize Picks, matchup bets, all of that sort of fun stuff. Make sure to check out my YouTube channel for that. But that's all I've got, guys. Like I said, best of luck with everything that you guys are going with. Let's get to the outro here, and I'll see you guys out there for the round 4 live stream tomorrow.